Welcome to season 2 of What Sales Can Learn From. In this season, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. And we're going to be talking with today's most successful sales leaders, not to find out what makes them so great, but where did they mess up that made them where they are today? What lessons have they learned from their mistakes? Because as Otto von Bismarck said, it is a fool who learns from his own mistakes. It's a wise man who learns from the mistakes of others. So subscribe to the channel, and if you've missed last season, check it out on the channel, What Sales Can Learn From Season 1. Here we go. Thank you for joining me for the first of the next series of What Sales Can Learn From. I am thrilled to have Sara Gupta as my first guest for this series, where we're going to talk about some of her biggest fails. However, Sara is no stranger to success. She's been in tech and sales and startups since 2007. She's now working at her 4th startup. She's worked at companies in startups that have been acquired by Visa. She's been the VP of sales at Bazaar Voice. Sara, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so thrilled.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So Sara, let's jump right into it, because we were talking earlier in our call about how sometimes in sales and sales leadership, we tend to put our shiniest foot forward. And I was really intrigued when I saw one of your posts on LinkedIn where you were talking about your biggest fail. And I thought, how refreshing is that, that we can actually be human again. So I'm curious to hear from you, because you have, I think, such a different take on this. What does a sales leader or a leader in general look like to you?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And thank you for having this series, because I think it is a really important topic to promote and highlight. We often focus so much on up and to the right, whether it be through metrics or whether it be through continued career success. And with that sort of comes this inherent need to feel perfect.
Yep.
And do things perfectly. I think we've seen from many great leaders that I certainly have read about and followed that they will often talk about how they're by no means perfect and they made a lot of mistakes along the way. So we can all, I think, learn from that, reflect on that, and grow from it. Kind of going back to your question, for me, my perception of leadership has really evolved a lot over my course of career and my time as a leader. And we'll, I think, kind of talk about that a little bit today. What it means for me now is to build a foundation of trust, to create a safe space for my team to succeed and to fail, to take risks, and to know that they can take those risks safely, and that we can sort of co-create success together. And then obviously to provide strategic direction, operational support. There's obviously those sort of tactical foundation, but it has to be rooted in knowing that there's a safe place to co-create and learn and fail together, and really bring that growth mindset forward.
I really love what you said about creating that safe place. I don't know if there's a lot of sales leaders out there that think of their team that way. In fact, I've had many calls with salespeople over the last couple of weeks where they say, I can tell that my boss just got yelled at because it's rolling downhill to me. Like, creating that safe place, kind of creating that buffer for your team to be able to clearly and be in the present with their buyer at that moment. I don't know if sales leaders realize how important that is for your salespeople to feel safe so that they can be human with their buyers, instead of being all emotionally triggered and involved and I've got to meet my quota or I'm going to get fired. And there's so much going on when we talk about sales. Sales is very personal. I heard you say sales is very human. So as you've been in sales leadership for quite some time now, over a decade. When I have to say that for myself, like I'm so old, but with age comes wisdom. And so as you look back in your career, what were the steps that you thought were critical in getting you into a leadership position for those out there that are looking at that path and maybe want to learn from some of the mistakes that you made in getting to that leadership place?
Yeah. So I think that, it's, as I've prepared for our discussion today, you and I talked about this, right? It's kind of created this really fun opportunity to do a little bit of like a mental career walk. And I think like many, when I entered into leadership or aspired to be in leadership, it was, to get more access to strategic projects, to, kind of meet my own ambition. It's sort of like, hey, I've been like, just to kind of continue to push the boundaries of my success. As I've been in leadership now for some time, the purpose for me has shifted pretty significantly, in that I am, now really in it to serve my team. My success is their success, and rooting myself in that. And ultimately that's true. Like, if the most successful thing I can do as a sales leader is have a team that's cranking, and that every individual is, exceeding quota and, wildly successful. But rather than coming from that as, from cracking the whip, it is what do you need from me to support you to be successful and meet your goals? What is your goal? How do we get you there? And let's, think about sort of how we're going to operationally support that. But then what do you need to sort of be mentally supported in that way? I try to really coach my team as individuals, what makes them tick, what motivates them, what's driving them to succeed. And so that's been, I think, a real shift in that, like, the joy for me in leadership today really comes through seeing my team, be successful.
And that's absolutely where I have found that it starts as well. When I've had a lot of people ask me lately, what do you mean a cognitive behavioral approach to sales? I'm like, it's all mental. And so if all of our mindsets and beliefs impact our behaviors and outcomes, then if we can change those mindsets and beliefs, and like you said, truly work with your team, and that starts with, like you said, understanding what's going to drive them to make those changes, what's personally meaningful to them. It's not going to be their quota. So
yes, as you well know, there's a lot of research on that, right?
Yeah.
That very few people actually at the beginning of the day wake up and saying, like, I'm going to go make a bunch of money today. That's like the lagging indicator, against all of the other leading indicators around, like, having a fun and work environment that feels purposeful. It feels like you are progressing, pushing the boundaries of, success and who you are on a daily basis. There's really trying to lean into what actually drives results for people.
One of my favorite things to quote in this is that there was actually a meta-analysis that was done by the Journal of Vocational Behavior, and they analyzed, I think, over 100 different studies of motivation on people and how it affects job performance, and found that those who were intrinsically driven by something personally meaningful was a stronger predictor of job performance. And it also helped them to learn and change behaviors and have fun. Like, who doesn't want their salespeople to have fun with their buyers? And that is so, so very key. So why do you think, back to the subject of failure, that so many salespeople try to hide the fact that they've flubbed up, that they've made mistakes?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, one, there's a lot of long-term cultural beliefs around that methodology and approach. It is a high-pressure environment. At the end of the day, we are here to deliver. I think it's a good segue into some of where I have, struggled particularly earlier in my career. Was it's easy to succumb to the pressure, and it's easy to, you want to be the best. Everybody wants to be the top seller. Everyone wants to be the best top sales manager. Everyone wants to be, top of the leaderboard. And so you don't really do this work if you're not competitive and a high performer inherently. What we need to allow, and what took me some time to see, is that there's a more human way to do that. We need to measure the metrics, and we need to find the things that motivate people. And what doesn't mean, so I guess kind of speaking to that, is what I have learned is that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be human in that. And that actually you can drive better results and more job satisfaction, higher amount of loyalty, commitment, higher level of consistency, if you create an environment by which sellers feel supported and feel like they have a place to a soft space to land should they fail. It took me a long time to get there. I really wanted to, I was the same exact way, and still of course am, balancing that grit and that tenacity against, being open-minded and supportive. It's a daily, it's a very mindful thing that I do on a daily basis to remember to show up that way.
It's not like it's something that you're all of a sudden you wake up one day and this happens, and that once you've done it, it's forever going to be that way. That's just not how us human beings work. If it were that way, there would be no such thing as gyms and weight loss programs. We'd all be
right.
So you mentioned some of the things that you learned, that the hardest thing was learning to be that transparency. Is there a particular incident or something where you were like, this is something that I need to change? So in other words, what was your biggest flub up?
Gosh, it's so funny. You kind of asked me this in preparation for this call, and it's funny. I thought of so many, whether it be something like, hey, I wish I had created more operational clarity sooner. I wish I had, coached that certain conversation differently. I wish I had isolated the bad apple on the team sooner and taken action, or noticed that someone else was struggling and supported them sooner. I can think of a million examples, truly. And so it was really difficult to pick any one. But I think always when it comes down to it, the most things that have been most impactful in terms of results have been people-oriented things. Whether it be, like I said, not sort of addressing, a challenging individual sooner, or, making sure that somebody who's struggling is getting, the right support soon enough, and, being coached. So I say that's sort of been the standout lesson over time, is to really, make sure that you're putting the people first, and that the results will follow.
So let's focus on the person who was a challenge. Some people might call it, I've heard other VPs call it, that toxic person, the negative person, the uncoachable person. When you look back at that, what is the thing that you wish you had known before? Like, what was the thing you didn't know that you didn't know then that you know now, that you wish you knew then?
I think that one thing I've learned is to try to address those conversations more head on, or those people more head on sooner. And so, to try to create a place of trust, and to try to create a coachable environment, and to try to help them better understand my motives. So that's something that I've definitely learned, is to say, hey, here's what I'm observing. Here's what I'm here to do. Here's how I'm here to serve you, but you need to be an active participant in this, versus one kind of avoiding it and letting the situation persist longer than it should. As well as, not taking into account the impact that an individual can have on the rest of the team. And, making sure that I am thinking holistically about the situation, rather than kind of getting emotionally, attached to, the solving that one individual, whatever the solve may be.
Right. And inevitably, after we make that mistake or whatever wrong decision, or saying the wrong thing, there's that little niggle of doubt that enters our minds, that you don't really know what you're doing, or how are you going to be able to do that if you can't do this? And, I can't believe that you did that. There's all of these little guilts that kind of enter our heads, and some maybe more than others. And I don't know to what extent that happened to you, but after you've made that mistake, how do you kind of bat that down and continue to move forward? How do you continue to develop that growth mindset that we all need in sales?
Yeah. And that's, again, where I love, I think one of the things you and I originally connected on was our sort of shared interest in like cognitive behavioral theory, because I think it's ultimately rooted in self-reflection and saying, okay, what am I going to learn from this experience, and how am I going to apply that forward? And that is an iterative process. That is, you don't go from 0 to 60. It's an evolved sort of process over time. And once I kind of started to settle into, being more self-reflective, and then trying to apply that forward, and that I think maps to this idea of letting go of my own personal need to be perfect. And when I allowed for my own imperfections, it allows me to be more self-reflective, which then actually allowed for the growth mindset, and said, okay, like, I see what I did here. I see how I could have handled this differently. And I'm going to try to, one, say, hey, is there a way to apply, this reflection to the situation right now? And two, how would I handle this differently going forward? And also the ability to allow for my own personal imperfections also allows me the ability to say, hey, like, I wish I handled that differently. I like with my team, right? And with my leadership, and, to be vulnerable and to be, to model the behavior that I want to see in others. And to say, hey, like, I let that go on too long, or I wish I would have had a different kind of conversation. Really just trying to be disciplined about being personally reflective in my own behavior and the role that I play in any scenario has been hugely impactful in kind of how I show up today.
Yeah. And it's such a cognitive behavioral thing, right? Because it's almost like the more we try to hold on to that perception of perfection that we try to portray to other people, the more that doubt sort of builds inside of us until it comes spilling out in some way. And it's almost like embracing imperfection helps us to get over the need for approval of other people, which makes you stronger and more confident. It's like an oxymoron. Like the less you try to be perfect, then people actually endear themselves to you more, because we can see through the BS. I'm sorry, we can. And at some level, I think we all know that, but we still try to portray that I'm perfect. There's nothing wrong. I know what I'm doing. There's no mistakes that I'm making. And that's just never the case.
To be able to show up authentically, to be able to take more risks, to show up with confidence, like those are all the ironic outputs of allowing for imperfection. And it's extremely freeing. And then it also allows, the other thing I've seen is it allows for better results. I have a scenario in which a team member of mine was in a late stage deal. It was highly complicated. Stakeholders were kind of getting fired left and right, like very senior leaders, because there was a lot of change going on in that organization. And, he got some really significant news about our primary economic buyer being fired. And we're like, oh my gosh, the deal is done. And he's sweating, he's freaking out, and like comes to me and we're just like, just take a deep breath. Okay. Like, it's happened. What are we going to do about it? We can all get spun up and, have a big freak out, but that's actually going to likely drive reactive behavior that will could actually completely derail the deal, versus taking a deep breath, collecting ourselves and thinking strategically around how we're going to put a plan in place. Allowing him to have had this imperfection in the deal that is oftentimes out of our own control, but a lot of sales leaders can place blame and say, oh, why didn't
you know that?
We should have closed it 10 days ago then, because what X, Y, and Z, we always sooner the better, or whatever it may be. But he instantly calmed, allowed him to kind of get more present in his own body and say, okay, you're right, let's go figure it out. We got the deal across the line. We actually got a better deal than we had expected, because we handled it with confidence and strength. And so I think that's like another, modeling that behavior down and sort of seeing that the results applied to like real life situations has been also really valuable in kind of remaining confident about the approach.
Yeah. I a lot of times I have coaching conversations with salespeople and things like that happen. And my response is, oh, well, what's now? What do we do now? What's next? Yeah. And it's happened, you can't undo it. You can't turn back time, but you can identify one small action that you can take right now it almost like it helps them to take control of their emotions, because you're giving them something to do. Like they're not just sitting there and stewing, like you said. And you mentioned it earlier too, being able to be transparent with your team and openly admit when you made mistakes. And I think this was something you had in your LinkedIn post. And I think for sales leaders, their first reaction is, well, what is my team going to say? How are they going to react? What are they going to look at me like? When you admitted, I should have dealt with this earlier with my team, with this particular, challenging person, what was their reaction? What did they say? Did the world end?
No, the world did not end. Most people respond very favorably to that of like, how, yeah, okay, cool. One, wow, she wasn't a total idiot and she saw what was going on and, was just picking her path on how to deal with it, which can actually give the team more confidence because oftentimes that silence, it can come across as like,
indifference.
I don't really know what's going on here.
Yeah.
So I think it boosted the confidence. It boosted the bond and the trust with the team. And then there's always going to be that individual, or a couple individuals who have strong points of view or think it should have been handled differently. But then that's where you have to just have your own personal confidence that the goal is not to get the goal is not to be liked by everyone. The goal is to drive results for everyone and do that in the best way that you know how. Most often that comes through, being decisive, creating a place of trust, and then being, transparent and vulnerable where appropriate. Because per your point, there's also times where it's like, it's not appropriate. And that can be one of the most challenging things is when you start to lean into a style of transparency and a style of vulnerability, kind of knowing where the line is on the other side of it, of not oversharing, of still creating that, layer of protection between senior leadership or creating that layer of protection between senior leadership and your team. So that's like the other side of the coin, I think.
Yeah, it's when you said that, where that line is with your team and transparency, I was immediately reminded of a conversation I had with a salesperson last week where their VP of sales came onto a group call. The company had just been acquired and she's in tears and crying and like you can't understand anything that she's saying. And I like, and it was not that there's anything wrong with crying in front of your team or in the workplace, but it was just kind of a little too much. And wasn't what it was. There is a line, I believe. I'm all for being vulnerable, 100%. But also have some emotional control to a degree. Which is important. So to wrap this up, we all know we make mistakes and it's really about what and how quickly we can learn from them. Are there things that you've put in place for yourself? You mentioned self-reflection to help you really learn quickly from those mistakes that you've learned as you've done these, past 13 years in tech sales.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've done is you and I talked about this, I just came out of a 1-year program in executive coaching that I invested in because I wanted to have, evidence-based tools to, work with my team in a more effective fashion on sort of the emotional and EQ, emotional intelligence front. And that that's been a big help to me. It's also allowed me to create a network of coaches and people that I rely on as a place of reflection, which can be highly powerful to have, because you can't share everything with your team and because you can't always rely on your leadership to be the place to have these dialogues.
Right.
It's really important to make sure that you have a network outside of your leadership and your team to process and reflect. I'm fortunate to know some coaches and people like that kind of allow me that space. And then really trying to learn from others. What am I seeing that's working, whether it be reading, about other leadership styles and approaches and leadership individuals in leadership that I, admire, or through people within my own organization who I think are doing a great job with their team, and really trying to get close to that. What are they doing? How are they doing it? Where did they learn it? So, trying to be observant beyond my own experiences.
Yeah, which goes perfectly in line with the whole theme of this show, which is it is a fool who learns from his own mistakes and a wise man who learns from other mistakes. So thank you so much for being here. And I love what you said about having coaches around you, because I firmly believe that everyone needs a coach. The coaches need a coach. The coach's coach needs a coach, because it is that ability to keep us, we're too close to our own junk in our own head to be able to really sometimes be able to see clearly. And that's why those types of relationships are so invaluable. And you're right that as a manager, our stuff does influence our teams, and we'll share some data about that. But thank you so much, Sara, for joining me on this. I'm excited to continue to share all kinds of not only stories about failures, but wins, and totally geek out about some cognitive behavioral approaches. Have a great time on the West Coast today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carole.
Thanks.
Stay tuned for our next episode by subscribing to the Sales Experts channel or the Unbound Growth blog and YouTube channel. Let's continue the conversation there or on the Sales Experts LinkedIn group. Check the attachments for links to both and to follow our guests on social media and their websites. Until next time.